Well, hey friends, and welcome back to my channel. Super glad you're here. So I know that it is barely November. However, I've been wanting to film this video for weeks now. I've actually been meaning to, but now we're finally getting to it. So what we're talking about today are some Christmas gift ideas that you can make from home, whether you're creative or not. Some require a little bit more creativity and skill than others, but we'll go through that. But overall, I'm just trying to be more budget conscious as we go into this Christmas season. We've done a lot of our Christmas shopping already, but I'm just trying to make sure that we don't go crazy overboard. We even just made a list of who all we needed to buy for and kind of the dollar amounts that we were going to spend or the things that we would like to get them. And by the time we finished that, we were like, wow, this adds up. You know, it does. It always does. And it always has. There's nothing new about that, but I think everybody feels the increase in the price of groceries right now, the increase in gas and cost of living in general. Interest rates right now, if you have tried to buy a house, are crazy. I mean, it's just everything right now is kind of out of whack in comparison to what we've been used to for the last while. So in saying all of that, I've just tried to find and come up with some creative ideas. These are things that I've done in the past, some things I'm doing this year, some things I'm doing again this year. So I'm going to try really hard to be a little bit discreet about it in my order of how I share these things, so that maybe it's not a complete giveaway to those that are in my close circle receiving these things. Maybe they won't completely know what they're getting. Anyways, without further ado, let's jump into it. So a lot of these actually come from within the kitchen, and I am not a big kitchen person, but I think that there's just something to be said for that, because there's something that comes along with the comfort of food, the comfort of providing a meal. And I think part of that is because it's keeping someone else from having to do that work that they would have to do otherwise. But also, like, maybe you have a different set of skills in the kitchen, or maybe you have a different experience. Like maybe you're from a different culture, a different country, and you have a whole different plethora of delicious recipes and meals that people in your life don't. And that's just something so cool that you can share with them without even having to learn anything or put in a whole lot of effort. It's simply something that you have access to because of the life experience that you've had. And I just think that is so cool. So in saying that, you can cook a meal. It's not necessarily something that we think of because it's maybe not something that, like, wrap in a box and tie a bow on it. But I think that that is such a great idea, especially like whenever I think about meal trains. And so if you're not familiar, like in several churches that I've been a part of and just like friend groups and things like that, we oftentimes do meal trains for people who have loved ones in the hospital, who are going through a time of bereavement where they've lost a family member. I know that when my dad passed away, I mean, meals were the ticket, you guys. There were so many people that stepped up and brought us food. Even if they didn't cook it, they bought sub platters from the grocery store and brought those to us, or they simply gave us a sympathy card with cash in it, and it specifically said, this is for the nights when you don't feel like this wasn't supposed to get emotional, but here we are right off the bat. That said, for the nights that you don't feel like cooking. And that could go for a family who's just had a baby, for a family who has multiple little kids. I mean, by golly, you get it if you're there. If you're in that fog, sometimes it's just everything you have in you to create a meal plan for the week, or to come up with each night as you go, like, what am I going to cook? It's just one more decision that needs to be made, one more thing that has to be planned for and thought out. And so I think gifting somebody a meal, whether it's fully cooked, whether it's partially cooked, even if it's just the ingredients, like, to me personally, if it was just a basket with like canned foods in it that, you know, you provide the recipe for them and say, okay, you put all this in the crock pot, turn it on low for 4 to 6 hours, and you have dinner. I think that's fantastic too, because then it doesn't go bad anytime soon. Like, it's shelf stable until they get ready or are in need of that. I will say, with anything in the kitchen, always be aware of people's sensitivities or allergies. I know that for most people, I feel like that's not going to be a thing, but maybe they even have dietary preferences, or, you know, just various things like that that you probably want to be aware of. Like, if you don't know the people you could still do it, but probably don't put a ton of time into it just in case they were to throw it away or give it to somebody else. just a thought. So along with that, I know that a lot of people do homemade desserts around Christmas time. We had some neighbors that were newlyweds of all things, where we lived before we moved here. And they made the peppermint bark, and like they gave us some, they gave, I guess, all their family some and their friends. And it was just a great way for people who were just starting out to, one, make some fun memories and start some traditions together, and two, not have to spend a lot of money on it. So it was something that they were able to do that blessed us, and I'm sure blessed many others, but then, you know, they got to enjoy hanging out together and doing something fun for other people. And so I think a lot of the times when we think of making desserts at Christmas, we think of doing that with our children. And while that's obviously super fun and there's a lot of great lessons to be learned and taught and memories that are being created in that, I think that it's great for anybody to do. Along with that, you also have like meat rubs and seasonings. As I'm saying this, I'm like thinking of more things. So I'm going to try to say them before I forget them, but without jumping around too much. So I found a copycat recipe for the Texas Roadhouse steak rub, and it is amazing. We've been using it since we got married, which was almost 6 years ago. Last year I gifted it in my gift basket at my family's White Elephant, and I'm probably going to do it again this year, spoiler alert, but it's just so easy. It's also shelf stable for quite a while, and you get a lot of use out of it, and it's not something that's overpowering, but it goes a long way. So I just highly recommend, and I think I'm going to explore other rub and seasoning recipes that I can make at home, because the truth is you can buy a lot of these at the store, maybe not the Texas Roadhouse copycat, but they're just going to have a lot of extra stuff in them, that like preservatives and added sugars and artificial flavors and whatnots that you don't have to put in yours at home. But it's something that you're giving to somebody that's going to be delicious, and it's going to be better for them. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, that at the end of the day, if it's homemade, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be more healthy than something that you bought at the store or got from a restaurant. So super cool how that works, that when we give these things, when we do these things ourselves and put our own hearts and hands to work in them, they ultimately end up blessing someone far beyond just the initial act of them receiving the gift. Does that make sense? I think in my brain it makes sense, but hopefully it does in yours too. So my other thought with that was, like, I saw something about bread and butter baskets, and I just think that is genius. I want to learn more about making different flavored butters and such, and I don't even know, like, if you know, comment down below. Do you have to go from scratch, like from the start? Do you have to make the butter homemade in order to add the different flavorings and make it like a special butter? Or can you get store-bought butter and do something to it that makes it delicious in its own fancy type of way? I don't know. I'm curious. Let me know if you know. Okay, so then another idea, you can combine it all and make a family recipe book, which I think is so sweet, because especially if you use recipes that either are passed down, like if they're secret family recipes, even better. But even if not, if they're things that are passed down, even if it's just a recipe that you make every year at Thanksgiving or every year at Christmas, or like my mom has this chocolate eclair that she makes with graham crackers and pudding and chocolate. I don't even remember what all's in it, but if I had a cookbook with it in there, that would be great, because every single get together, my cousin requests that she makes that. Like, never fails. That's the only thing that my cousin wants my mom to bring for her contribution to the meal, is that chocolate eclair. And so if you had things like that, where you know that the people around you are going to be interested in having those recipes on their shelf that they can just grab real quick and make anytime they want. It still won't be the same, granted, as when that special family member makes it for you or brings it, because that's like their thing. I recognize that. But having it all in one place, especially for, you know, down the road, that you can pass on to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and it be something that you have that to remember them by. I think that's just such a cool idea. And I'll attach some pictures, but I've also seen some inspiration photos of this where people do it. This would get me all in the feels, but people do it like if they're making the recipe book for their children, or like if the husband was making it for the wife or whatever, they would take pictures of the recipe being made. So like the actual people that are doing it. So for example, sticking with the chocolate eclair reference, if I had a picture of my mom actually cooking that meal and that picture was printed right next to the recipe in the recipe book, I think that would be just precious. Also, if it was a book for myself, for my daughters, my grandchildren, future great grandchildren, all that, if there were pictures of me and my girls cooking those meals, that would be awesome too. I think I might do that down the road for them to have when they get older. I think that'd be really sweet. So anyways, there's an idea. Another thing, it's not really food, but it is in the kitchen, so I'm looping it in with this kitchen section. Stovetop potpourri. I've mentioned before on here how much I love it because it doesn't have added fragrances and such that give headaches. It is all like natural ingredients and it's super easy, way cheaper than candles that you can buy these days from certain major retailers. And it's just so cozy. But not to mention, if you get like a large bag of oranges, a jar of cinnamon sticks, some cloves, vanilla extract, some of those things, you can make jars of stovetop potpourri for so many people in your life. Neighbors, teachers, friends, family, all of the above for such a small dollar amount when you look at it, like how it breaks down. You can get a lot out of it. So definitely recommend that as an option. Okay, so moving on from the kitchen section to the sewing section. Bear with me, it doesn't mean that you have to know how to sew like a pro in order to be able to do these gifts. So there are some very beginner ideas that, there's so many ideas in the world of sewing, but there's a couple of very beginner ideas that I want to pitch to you first. So first of all, you can make some homemade hot cold packs that can be either refrigerated or they can be kept in the freezer. My girls love these at their, one is 3. So at their current age of life, they are all the time getting bumps and bruises and hangnails and little boo-boos, just from random little things around the house. But the first thing that they always want after we pick them up and console them is a heart, because ours are in the shape of hearts. So we always run to the freezer, grab one, and it's problem solved. It's the cutest thing ever. But I've also heard that there was a blog that I was reading before I started making these that encouraged me in this. They had grade school age children and they started realizing how cozy they were to fall asleep with at night. So they would heat them in the microwave and then lay down with them at night, obviously not too hot, but it was just something cozy to comfort them in their bed at night, and then they fell asleep. And obviously it's not plugged in, it's not something that's continuing to generate heat, so it wasn't a safety hazard. It was just enough to kind of comfort them. And yeah, and then of course heat is always good for injuries, for inflammation, for cramps, for all kinds of stuff. So I love that. And last year in my white elephant box, I made the shape of stars. And then at Valentine's Day, we made a ton of hearts, which is why we have hearts in our freezer. But you can even do something as simple as a square or a rectangle, and they really are not hard to make. Maybe I'll link some Pinterest articles down below where you can see the how-to, because they're very, very simple and also very inexpensive. On that same token, you can do quilted hot pads for casserole dishes that go between the casserole dish and the countertop so that it doesn't scratch or crack or scuff up your counter whenever you put a hot dish on it. So I love that idea. There's some really intricate ones on Pinterest, but listen, you don't have to make them that fancy for them to be well received. I think just the idea of it, as well as if someone gives me a gift that they put their time and effort mostly into, or even just if they're a middleman and somebody else did and then they bought it from them and I'm receiving the gift, I am much more inclined to have a hard time giving that away, because I know that someone put way more work into that than probably what they got paid for it. For example, several years back now, but one of my coworkers at the time was wanting to get coworker gifts, and she went to a fall bazaar at some church in the area and ended up getting us these they're just little mittens that just cover your 4 fingers. And I think that they were crocheted out of paracord or some kind of really heavy duty yarn. And you use them to scrub dishes and stuff. And there were 2, and then it also came with a little crocheted basket that held them. I used those things until they got so funky, but they were so well loved. I don't think that they costed her much, but they were just one of those things that I was even if I wouldn't have picked them out, I was gifted them and then I used the mess out of those things. So handmade gifts are hard for people to get rid of. Just keep that in mind. And then along the lines of like more beginner level sewing things that honestly, a lot of these you can use like fabric glue if you don't want to use a sewing machine, or you can hand sew. I would just use caution on some of the things if you're hand sewing, because you want them to be durable, you want them to be long lasting, and you want them to be safe if you're giving them to kids or people with kids, right? So some other things are like fabric bowl covers that can be washed and reused. You can make all different sizes. You can make bookmarks. If you get into embroidery, there's just like a whole world that you could go crazy with. So check that out. I mean, embroidery is one of the easiest in terms of like startup investment things that you can try to learn, because it literally, the floss is like 55 cents and they go a pretty long way depending on what you're trying to make. So again, all of this is dependent on your time, which leads me to our final little section of this, and that is more of, I guess, like the advanced sewing, but really it's just what you have the time and energy and patience for, because I'm by no means a professional quilter. I don't know that I would ever sell one of my quilts because I just see the imperfections when I look at them. However, I did gift them last year in a couple of white elephant baskets, and the cost of materials stayed well, like easily under the $25 limit for each box. However, when you calculate time, that's when things get really expensive. So if you were going to buy a handmade quilt, then you would be paying far more than $25 a basket. But if you're going to make it and you have the time to put into it, by all means go for it. And also, I say that these are more advanced, but you can do them as beginners. There are many, many beautiful, simple quilts out there. And the ones that I did were just like a throw size, so they weren't anything massive. But it's a great idea. People love getting quilts. They love it. It's just something that, again, not a ton of people either have the skill set to do or want to take the time to figure out how to do it. So I think it makes the gift that much more meaningful. And then once you kind of branch into that whole realm, you can get into pillowcases. There's all kinds of different blankets and crocheting and embroidery if you want to go that route. You could get into clothing. But in general, like with sewing, there's just so many options because so much of what we have is sewn, right? And so it's like when you know how to do that, you know how to create so much more. So again, I just think it's so neat that if we go back to the basic skills of learning things that I think have kind of gotten lost through the generations, not only do we become more self-sustainable, but we become more practical in our gift giving, in our, like it gives back in so many ways. Whenever you kind of have this skill set in your back pocket of sewing or being familiar with how to thread a needle on a sewing machine, those kinds of things, or even threading a needle to hand sew, when you have the confidence for those things, it not only helps you to take care of the people inside of your house, but I think it helps us to bless the people outside of our house as well. So you may be in a season where you're like, no, Amazon is the way, and that's okay too. I just wanted to provide some options that really anybody can take a stab at. These are not isolated to any one type of person. I think that there's ways to give really, really beautiful gifts, and I'm not talking like Pinterest beautiful, because I don't think everything that we do has to be Pinterest worthy, but I do think it needs to come from the heart. There's just a lot of things that I think can be found beautiful in these gift ideas, and they can either be given individually or they can be given in a basket as an array of things. And there's just a lot to be admired and respected about a handmade gift. And yeah, so hopefully they'll help save us some money along the way. Also, I hope that you are having a wonderful start to your November. I'm excited for Thanksgiving to come. And yes, already planning and decorating for Christmas. I think we can crisscross and have the more the merrier with holiday season, like have it all at the same time. I think it's fantastic. So I hope you have a great day wherever you're at, and I'll catch you next time. Bye guys.